Over here. Hey, have you heard about this podcast? It's called The Away Team. It's pretty interesting stuff. You should check it out.
James catches, puts up a three. Won't go. Rebound Bosh. Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining.
Hey, welcome back to The Away Team podcast. I'm Dimitri.
It's Cole here. How's it going?
I think we've officially broken into teams that are basically already in the playoffs as of right now with the Orlando Magic and the Brooklyn Nets. Very exciting.
Oh, yeah.
Super exciting. I mean, two teams with 30 and 30-something records, which had, very interesting seasons. Not really interesting at all, actually.
I mean, there were segments of the season and interesting aspects of the team.
Yes, that's true. Well, at least we're into the East playoffs now.
Yeah.
We can say that.
Yeah.
So I guess we can start with the Magic.
All right. Orlando Magic.
Yeah.
The 8th seed as it stands.
As it stands. And they're in their home market, so that's good for them.
Yeah. Maybe that's a benefit.
Who knows? Really, in this kind of situation, it's almost impossible to tell. But we'll see. They had, I think, a 15-30-minute bus ride from wherever their practice center is to the bubble. So, I mean, I imagine compared to flying and having to sit for 2 weeks in quarantine, that's preferable.
Yeah, at the beginning of the player arrivals to Orlando, I was like, man, the Magic got there so fast, and all of their players showed up. And then I was like, oh, wait, that's 20 minutes away.
So, I guess we'll start with the offseason of 2019. Sure. So, during the NBA draft, they had the 16th pick, and they drafted Chuma Okeke, who we haven't seen much of this season. No,
he hasn't played very much. During the draft, taking him at 16 was a bit of a stretch. NBADraft.net had him going 33. The Ringer had him going 39. Kevin O'Connor was pretty high on him with a 21 ranking. Basically, the guy's 6'8" with a 7-foot wingspan and a pretty good three-point shooter. John Hammond, the GM of the Magic, is known for drafting big, lengthy, athletic wings. Or rather, just big, lengthy, athletic players in general. So this was kind of par for the course for him.
Yeah, no matter how raw.
I mean, he drafted Giannis.
Yeah, and I mean, he kind of solved one of their problems in theory because he's a really nice three-point shooter.
Yeah.
Whether that will translate into the NBA has yet to be shown, but in theory, he bolsters the defensive side of the team, which we know is critical to their identity, and then he adds an offensive aspect to it as well. Although, I agree, at 16, come on. There were still plenty of great players available on the list at that point.
Yeah, I mean, my big issue with drafting Okeke this high is, why wouldn't you just draft a ball handler this high? They have so many big athletic defenders on the team, and what they really lack is somebody other than Markelle Fultz to handle the ball. I think this is going to be a theme that we'll get into a little bit later on, but I saw the draft as a chance to address it.
Which they didn't. I mean, they could have had Terrence Davis, a.k.a. TD2, as we like to call him. So that's a pretty big whiff. But, we'll see maybe next year when Okeke theoretically will make his debut, what kind of player he is. There's just not much to go off as of yet.
Yeah.
And then they also had a second-round pick, Talen Horton-Tucker, who for 538, I remember, had him as the best pick in the draft for some reason. I don't know if it was a small sample size thing. I remember just being shocked by it. But he went to the Lakers, and I think he played maybe a few games for the Lakers this year, but otherwise has just been riding the G League. So not much to say there. Free agency. They got Al-Farouq Aminu from the Trailblazers. They signed him to a 3-year, $30 million contract. I mean, he was pretty good for Portland.
I was a big fan of this signing. I just thought 3 years, $29 million was a really solid value for Al-Farouq. He's a guy that wins games for you. He's a guy that can be in a rotation for a winning team. He hits threes. He defends well. What's not to like?
It's true. The problem is, we've seen this pattern, right? With the draft, with these signings, it's just not solving their offensive problems that much. You might have a couple of good catch and shoot guys, but yeah, like you said earlier, the ball handling just isn't there.
Right.
So probably the biggest deal for them was re-signing Vucevic after an amazing season last year on 4 years, $100 million, which for a player like Vucevic is, I would say, a pretty great bargain.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised he didn't get a full max. being his age and having the production that he had the previous season, in many situations, he was their go-to scorer.
Makes me wonder, where is the Magic hoarding all this cap space, right? They have all these guys on, like, budget contracts, and yet their best player, Vucevic, they're not even giving a full max. Like, I'd be interested to see what their cap situation exactly is and why it's so stingy.
Yeah.
Do they just have a bunch of guys on, like, stretch provisions from ages ago? I'm not sure.
I know for a while they had the Biyombo and Mozgov contracts, never at the same time, but I think they were traded back and forth at least once.
Mozgov, I think, might still be getting paid by them. I believe he is getting paid until 2022.
By the Magic.
Yes,
yeah.
For almost $6 million a year. It's pretty, yeah. I mean, that'll do it.
That's like almost a mid-level exception player.
Pretty much, yeah. So that does actually limit you pretty significantly for someone who's never going to see the court. And the other thing that the Vucevic thing underpins, right, is that clearly the center position for them, they don't have the next generation ready to step in yet.
Yeah.
They need this veteran guy who's clearly proven himself, even though I think what they know they need to be doing is developing young talent, just based on what the reality in front of their face is. There's just no way that they can slot in someone like Mo Bamba in his position and be a team that is competing for the same kind of seed that they're competing for in their current state.
Yeah, there were some people that were upset with this deal just because it would limit Mo Bamba's playing time, but Bamba's just not ready for starter minutes.
Oh, the humanity.
There's just no way.
Oh, the humanity. We can't play Mo Bamba more. Yeah, I think we all know why Mo Bamba's not playing more minutes.
Right, and the same sort of people that are arguing Mo Bamba should be starting are the tear it down people, and my message to them is, really, you want to tear it down when this team has been drafting in the lottery for, 6, 8 straight years?
Yeah.
What's to tear down? you know?
Yeah, you look at it and just look at their roster and tell us what more you can tear down without just like ripping the heart out of the franchise.
Right.
Because if you are a small market franchise like the Magic, you still do have to make some attempt to have a packageable product so that you're profitable year after year. Making the playoffs brings in some more revenue. I understand where they're at. Anyways, so they also got Terrence Ross back on a 4-year, $54 million contract. Pretty good. I mean, he's one of their few sources of offense. He's got clear limitations on the court, but at the same time, for the money that they're paying him, it's not that bad.
Yeah, not bad at all. Not only one of their few sources of offense in general, but is their only source of offense in the bench rotations.
Right.
Like, if you watch them play, they're running play after play for him, pin down screens to get open threes, tons of off-ball movement. He is their offense on the second units.
Yeah, I remember looking at the roster and various stats that everyone piled up this year and was just shocked that he attempted more threes per game than Evan Fournier. But it makes sense considering that the starting lineup just has that much more offensive capability. Not much, but a little bit.
Right.
So, I mean, you've probably noticed a pattern here. They also signed Michael Carter-Williams. And what is his specialty?
Being long and athletic.
Yep. Being good at defense. So, great. I mean, they have him. He actually was not bad for them. He was part of, one of their best lineups, as we'll get into later, but not really making much of a splash. And then you have Khem Birch, 2 years, $6 million, pretty much close to a minimum.
Just really quick, Michael Carter-Williams, at the minimum, I think is an awesome deal just because the defense is so good. His defense is ferocious. I mean, he's getting under guys. He's coming around them for offensive rebounds, coming around them for defensive rebounds, playing a lot bigger than he is. That guy's a monster on defense.
And he's not that old.
He's older than you think. He's almost 30.
He's almost 30, but he's not, super washed or anything. For a minimum, considering that a minimum is basically free in the NBA based on how cap rules work, could be a lot worse.
Yeah, he did come into the league at the age of 23, though. So it's he's a lot older than we expect him to be.
So I guess going into this season, do we replicate how do we define playoff success for the Magic, right?
Right.
Making the playoffs. So, they made the playoffs. They were 7th seed last year, took a game from Toronto, lost the next 4. Basically, most people, I think, expected them to be locked for the playoffs just because of how bad the bottom half of the East really is. And having Vucevic and Evan Fournier is enough to make the playoffs in the East, apparently.
Can I just do a little aside on where I was when the Raptors lost that game 1?
Where were you?
I was at a bar And on the big screen, they were playing the Maple Leafs, Game 7 against Boston, which they lost.
Of course.
Right? And it's the most promising Maple Leafs season in recent history, right? And then on the little screen, I heard somebody say, well, at least the Raptors are still in it. And as she's saying it, the Raptors lose also.
Well, thank God. Thank God that was just one game, because that would have been really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have been terrible if they'd lost more than one game to the Magic.
The mood of the room was not great.
No, I can't imagine it was. So, yeah, I mean, get into the playoffs. You have a few young players like Mo Bamba, Jonathan Isaac, Markelle Fultz that you're expecting to see some development from, right? I mean, for Fultz, you don't know what you're expecting.
You want to see something.
Yeah, and I think Magic fans, you'll be pleased by what Fultz had to show. And then Aaron Gordon, I think, was also a big question mark for them because you had certain writers, I think like Zach Lowe, saying that he's prepared to make this next step to be an all-star.
Yeah.
Which was tempered with a little bit of doubt, like, is he really that good? He had a really good year last year. What would happen this year? And, would he, just become their second option? Would he be an all-star? Would he wallow in place? Would he regress? All of these are possibilities, but I think a lot of people had their bets on he is going to make another step because he's had consistent progression from year to year.
Right. And the question with him is always, okay, you play like a number one option, but perhaps that's not your best role because some of the best things that you actually do when you dig down into the stats and the film are more traits of a complementary player.
Right.
Maybe the best version of Aaron Gordon is somebody like Draymond Green. Or maybe it's more of a face-up shooter, I just don't even know.
He was very much an enigma coming into the season, but I think, as we'll get into, this season did really show what a lot of his strengths versus weaknesses really were.
So let's get into the season.
Yeah. Inconsistent, I guess, would be the word to use.
Yeah, so they start out the season 2-6, and then they go on a small 4-1 run. And from there on out, it's basically just little losing streaks and little winning streaks. Mediocrity, but not quite as mediocre as some of the other teams that we were looking at. So their season was most noted for the disparity between their record against teams below 500, which was 25-9.
Which is better than Miami, Dallas, Denver, Indiana, and all the other teams tied or below them in the seeding charts.
Right, that's a contender level percentage.
Right.
Right?
If you are contending against below 500 teams.
Unfortunately, that's not all of the league.
Yes. So then you have the other side, 5-26 above teams above 500, 16% win rate, which is, I think it's worst in the entire league.
I know it's worse than the Atlanta Hawks.
Yeah, and it's hard to get worse than the Atlanta Hawks did this year. So it's unbelievable how bad they were.
Yeah,
against these more competent teams.
When I was researching their season, I looked back at their last 12 games, and I saw an 8-4 stretch, and I was thinking, oh, okay, maybe they were starting to figure something out, put something together. You want to hear the teams they beat during that 8-4 stretch?
Go for it.
Atlanta twice, Detroit, Brooklyn, Minnesota twice, Memphis, and Houston.
Houston's respectable.
Yeah, but the rest?
Yeah. And then the other, few above 500 teams that they beat were the Lakers, the Heat, and Philly twice, just peppered throughout the season. And then we kind of have a visage of what this spells for their time in Orlando, in a way. If they do maintain similar win rates, that's not good. They're going up against mostly teams above 500 in this bubble.
Yeah.
And it's not a good thing to be that bad against them. I think the only saving grace is that they're only competing with Washington and Brooklyn, who we'll see later has been hollowed out at the core.
Right. Going into this pod, I was thinking Brooklyn is a lock for the 8 seed. That stat makes me think maybe I should reconsider that view.
It's really a big question. I mean, if Brooklyn had any one of its decent players, I would say it would be a contest. I do think that the Magic will pull through just because they actually have a full roster, more or less. Aside from, and let's get into the season, Jonathan Isaac, we don't really know if he's playing. It's been kind of unclear.
He's with the team.
He's with the team. He seems to look better. He might be doing practice, I'm not sure. But there's been no final word on whether or not he's going to be participating. You know they want him to participate, though, because he had a really, really great season before he got injured. I mean, some of these statistics that he had, he was doing decently with points, scoring about 12 points a game, 7 rebounds, getting 1.5 steals, and 2.4 blocks.
The blocks were insane. I did some research. So his block rate was number 1 in the NBA among forwards by a mile. For a player of his position, a combo forward type player, it's the best block rate since Andrei Kirilenko in 2004. Also filtering for players that played 900 minutes or more.
And in defensive BPM, he was second in the league.
Second in the league in DBPM. The other stat that I thought was pretty crazy is that he was 24th in defensive win shares, despite being on a middling team and only playing 32 games.
I mean, that's pretty outstanding.
Also, these stats are still also for combo forwards that played 900 or more minutes.
Right. Yeah, and I think the thing that Orlando fans can look forward to is that he's just so versatile. People talk about Bam Adebayo, for example, as a guy that can guard all these positions. I don't know if Isaac has that versatility yet, but he can guard pretty much the 3 to the 5 like an expert.
I think in some ways he's even more versatile than Bam Adebayo defensively. I think Bam Adebayo is going to be able to guard bigger 5s better than Isaac ever will be able to. But the way Isaac, at his size, can chase around smaller, quicker players is unbelievable. I watched tape of one of the Philly wins that they had, and he starts the game out on Al Horford, who's much bigger than him, and then mid-game, they switch him on to Ben Simmons. Totally different players.
Right, and he just adapts perfectly.
Yeah, he's unbelievable.
Yeah.
He guarded Porzingis in the just game. It's just like, all these players are so different. And you watch him when smaller pick-and-roll players run the pick-and-roll, and he's guarding the roll man. If he has to switch onto the pick-and-roll ball handler, he does that so well. He's just so quick and long.
Right. The limitation that he has is his offensive game, which is going to be a common theme as we go through these Magic players. And so we'll move on to one that I think pretty much everyone on the Magic hoped would develop more as a reliable offensive player. Aaron Gordon had the worst true shooting percentages of his career. I mean, he shot 43% from the field, 30% from 3, and below 70% from the line. And his true shooting was the 4th worst among non-rookie starters in the league. Just really abysmal. And, I think a lot of the reasoning behind this has been pointed out by commentators as he wants to be the first option so desperately, right? So he falls into these hero plays. He lacks the awareness to pass out of them when he's gotten himself into a bad position on like a post-up or some other ill-advised play. Just these various things that are holding him back. And I think the Magic is also misusing him in ways as well.
It's funny, you watch the tape and the possessions where they're clearly drawn up for Aaron Gordon to get the ball and do something with it, whether that's a post-up, which you found he's terrible on those plays, right?
Yeah, basically, just to quickly go through it, on spot-up shooting, which was 16.2% of his plays, he was in the 26th percentile and shot 32% on those kinds of shots. Post-ups, which were 14% of his plays, which is a lot. He was around 52nd percentile in efficiency, but just due to the nature of posting up being inefficient, that's still only 0.92 points per possession, which really isn't going to get you out of that mess. As a ball handler in the pick and roll, terrible. 19th percentile. That was 14% of his plays as well. He scored about 2/3 of a point per possession on those plays, which is insanely bad. I mean, really, it just shows that he shouldn't be ever running the pick and roll. He shouldn't be posting up, and he probably shouldn't be spot up shooting. The one shining light is that he shot 79% on cuts, but they were only 8% of his plays. So it's a very well-rounded distribution of play types, but the problem is he clearly has his strengths and weaknesses, and you have to, at some point, start using his strengths and not pretending like his weaknesses don't exist.
Well, I think those numbers are pretty clear on what his strengths are, which are off-ball. And you see that in his efficiency as the roll man. which is in the 72nd percentile amongst players.
But it's like less than 3% of his plays. They barely use him in that position when I think they could use him a lot more.
Right, which I think is a strategic fault. They should be running more pick and roll with him as the roll man. And like you said, the cuts. Like if you watch the film, the best Aaron Gordon plays are the ones where he is putting himself in positions off ball for easy baskets. He's cutting to the basket and they're throwing him the easiest lob in the world because the guy jumps 10 feet in the air.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Speaking of, let's not forget to mention that he was robbed blind a second time in the dunk contest.
Yep.
Just to quote him, "What are we doing? Seriously, you jump over Taco Fall and you don't win?"
He should have jumped over 2 Taco Falls.
He should have jumped right into Dwayne Wade's face and slammed that shit in his fucking... Anyways.
Next dunk contest, if he participates, they need to put Dwayne Wade on top of Taco Fall and have him dunk over that.
I think you've just unlocked the secret. It's too bad Aaron Gordon is never going to participate in another dunk contest again in his life.
Absolutely not.
So Markelle Fultz, another player that we saw a lot of this season and a lot more than we've ever seen of before. He started almost 60 games, kind of replacing DJ Augustine, who had a really bad season, so I won't talk about him too much. Terrible from the three-point line, but he at least tried a little bit. You know, he took a couple attempts a game.
They started looking a little more natural. They didn't look like the weird baseball wind-up shots that he was shooting in Philadelphia.
And when they went in, it was awesome. It was, like, so exciting. It's like, damn, he can actually make those with that really weird release. And, I mean, from, like, at the rim, he was 65%. Really great finisher.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that you notice immediately when you watch the tape is he's very fast and very good at slowing down and speeding up, right? His ability to shift speeds in both directions is very apparent, and he leverages that to get to the basket a lot. He averaged 12 drives per game, which is pretty good for a starter. It's not like next level top scorer sort of numbers, but for a guy who's averaging 12 points per game, that's a really strong number. And he shot 59% on those drives, which is really solid too.
It's pretty good. And I mean, he showed that he was kind of a decent pick and roll player as well. Just based on the eye test, he's capable. The problem is just isn't super efficient on that yet.
Yeah.
It's still below 0.9 points per possession, unfortunately.
Which is really bad for pick and roll plays, yeah.
And then the defense is pretty good. I mean, this is just going to be a pattern that you'll see with pretty much every Magic player, whether it's the system or the players. The defense is amazing. I mean, they have such a great defense. It's a top 5 defense in the league by some metrics, top 10 by others. Basically, you got to watch out when you go up against them because they can lock down some of your most dangerous players.
Yeah, the defense especially, though, is really promising for Fultz at his age. It's very unique to find a player as young as he is that's as defensively aware as he is. So you can only imagine he's going to get better at that skill going forward.
Yeah. Another great player for them was Vucevic. He kind of regressed. Kind of like Aaron Gordon. They both got a little bit less efficient than last year. Mm-hmm. You could attribute this to last year being a contract year. Perhaps. I mean, he still only got $25 million a year, so what the hell, but...
Man, it's so funny how that contract year stuff, like... You always think that sports talking heads are hyperbolizing players playing better in their contract years, but they just do so often too. Even Terrence Ross, his numbers from last year to this year were significantly worse.
Yeah, I mean, Vucevic is still their best player by a mile, but a little bit of regression plus the fact that he's getting up there, he's leaving his prime. He kind of makes you think of what really is coming for the Magic. And then we have Evan Fournier.
Contract year.
And don't Google that, by the way. Yeah, he had a great season. 47% from the field, over 40% from 3 on almost 7 attempts a game. He has a player option this offseason, which is the big question mark for them right now. Does he take it and take the really big salary? Or does he, he's getting up there as well. He has probably one big contract left to sign. What does he do, right? What happens to their lineup if he doesn't stay? Because he's probably their best offensive player, and it's not even close.
Especially if you're quantifying best offensive player in terms of shooting from the outside. Like, he's their best shooter, period.
Yeah, they have no spacing without him.
Yeah.
At all. Like, no one else on the team is a threat from the outside, particularly. I mean, their next best shooter is Terrence Ross, and he shot, I think, about 35% on threes. So, really, depending on what teams you're going up against, a lot of teams are going to double or triple Vucevic and just ignore your three-point shooters if he gets too close to the rim.
One thing I thought was interesting about Fournier is they were plus 3.5 points without him on the court. The offense without Fournier was terrible, right? 109.6 points per 100 possessions. But the defense was significantly better. 106.2 points per 100 possessions, which would have been tied with Boston for fourth in the league if it was spread out across the entire season. So, like, you know, you think about these things in terms of if you lose a shooter, that loss in efficiency is just very hard to manage. But the loss in efficiency actually came at a gain in defensive production.
Right.
Which I didn't expect.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to know that they even have any more efficiency that they could squeeze out of their defensive lineups.
Yeah.
After, like, how good they are already on that side of the court. But at the same time, if we're looking at basketball holistically, like, you need someone like Fournier on your team just to provide that spacing and that threat from the outside. Because without him, what is the team, right?
Yeah.
Just a bunch of dudes that hang out inside the arc.
Yeah, I mean, if anything else but for lineup flexibility.
So the trade deadline, not really much happened. They got James Ennis from Philadelphia for a 2020 second round pick. Not much to say about that. I mean, he's a marginal player in the league.
Yeah, I've got nothing there.
So let's get into their lineups, right? So they're what I called their bread and butter lineup, which was 240 minutes played. Their most played lineup was Markelle Fultz, Evan Fournier, Aaron Gordon, Jonathan Isaac, and Vucevic. Was around +2 over that time in terms of net rating. And, you know, it's like we said, mediocre.
Yeah.
And then you switch out Terrence Ross instead of Jonathan Isaac. You'd expect it to get a lot worse because of how good Jonathan Isaac is on defense. But actually, they only dip by about 2 points per 100 possessions, which is significant, but not as significant as you'd think. So it makes me think the issues with this team are just, they go deep. If they ever want to get further than the 7th seed in the East, they need to really, really reconsider this roster construction.
Really, I don't think they go that deep. I think they've got a lot of really quality role players on this team. Like, their rotation is filled with players that I think could play major minutes on a championship team. The issue for me is they need a guy to just give the ball to get things going. To run the offense. They just don't have a person like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're making moves with Fultz to get him closer to the capable playmaker level, but it's just not there yet.
I mean, think about if Stephen Curry joined this team.
Well,
I know that's hyperbolic, but think about how amazing they would be just to have these players around him.
Could you imagine if LeBron ran point for the Orlando Magic?
What if they got MJ, LeBron, and prime Shaquille O'Neal?
No way. No way. Shaq would never sign with the Magic. So this is actually a funny one. Just a little trivia lineup because it only played 40 minutes, so pretty small sample size. But DJ Augustine, Michael Carter-Williams, Aaron Gordon, Terrence Ross, and Vucevic was a +40. That's ridiculous. And I really don't know why it was so good, considering you don't really have any offense aside from Terrence Ross. Theoretically, DJ Augustine is a capable offensive player, but this year, not really. I think it's probably just a fluke. It might have just been like, this is the cleanup lineup to put these terrible Eastern Conference teams to bed once and for all.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason that lineup is good is because you finally have Aaron Gordon playing the 4. According to Cleaning the Glass, the minutes where Aaron Gordon is playing the 4 were 3 points per possession better than when he played the 3. So, I mean, you just want to see more of that. Like, what I like about that lineup is you have a few quality defenders in Gordon, Michael Carter-Williams, and Terrence Ross, and then you have shooting.
And then I think this is another one. This is just a 2-man lineup. And I think this goes to your point that you were just saying with Aaron Gordon being better at the 4 than the 3. If you pair Gordon and Isaac, you're actually a -3.5 over almost the 500 minutes that they played together. I mean, it really just isn't a combination that seems to be working for them. And if you're the front office, I think you have to look at that number and think long and hard about what you can get for Aaron Gordon when you trade him.
Yeah, I think if you're the Magic front office, you are very alarmed at that number because that's ideally your starting forwards for the next 5 years, you know?
Right. I mean, if we don't see Aaron Gordon move to a different team in the next couple years, I would be very surprised.
What do you think about trading him for LeBron?
It could work. Do the salaries match up? I don't think if you combined every player on the Magic that you could combine enough salary to trade for LeBron. I don't think it's possible without just like totally screwing the rosters. I don't think they'd have enough players.
They'd be left with Michael Carter-Williams.
They'd call Timothy Mozgov. Hey man, we know we have you out on a stretch provision, but we were wondering if we could call you for one last job. He's like, duh. Yeah, so I guess all of this is to say, how are they going to do in the bubble? Isaac, if he plays, that's going to be a big difference than if he doesn't. We just don't know yet. The advantages they have are they're already in their home market, even if they're not playing at their home stadium, and they have pretty much a full lineup. I think they have a completely full lineup, if I'm not mistaken, aside from Jonathan Isaac. They got Fournier back from an elbow injury near the suspension of the season. So on paper, they actually look pretty solid. I was reading 538 the other day, and they give them a pretty significant chance of moving into the 7th seed. Because Brooklyn and Washington, as we said, they're half the teams that they were before the season ended. And that wasn't much of a team to begin with.
I mean, if I was the Magic, I would be using Orlando as a way of testing my players. Do you guys have that big dick energy to compete against over 500 teams?
Right.
Because your record right now says you don't.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the issues with the roster as it goes up against these better teams, just to be frank, they don't have the killer lineup. They don't have a killer guy. They don't have Das Killer Instinct.
Das Killer Instinct.
Yeah, to finish these games. I mean, they might have stolen a couple games from pretty capable teams, but there's so many weaknesses in the offensive side of their coaching and just their roster that there's just not much they can do, really, at this point. I mean, aside from, go up against the Raptors again in the first round instead of the Bucks, what more can you hope for?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in agreement then that they need to be really testing who's going to be our lead ball handlers and how do our guys respond to pressure.
And, I mean, that leads to, I think, the last things that we have to say about them, which is, what are they doing? Are they just going to keep doing these first round outs? Because even next year, that's not going to be a guarantee that they even make it into the playoffs. Because if you have John Wall back and Bradley Beal playing on the Wizards, and John Wall is 80% of the player he used to be, there's a competitor.
Yeah.
The Nets are going to have KD and Kyrie. If they don't blow up from the inside, then there's pretty much a guaranteed seed spot that goes out the window. And I don't see any of the other teams in the East getting much worse in that time either. So, what are they doing?
Yeah, and, if they decide that their team is inadequate to compete with the other teams that you mentioned, I do think that blowing it up isn't an option. The only other option is to tear it apart in order to get a better team now, right?
Yeah.
Trade Aaron Gordon for a capable player now.
Yeah, they really do need to start thinking about making the difficult decisions of who do we keep, who do we trade. I think if Fournier takes his player option, he's a good candidate. Aaron Gordon, of course. And then they really don't have that much youth on the team. And the youth that they do all have big questions about their game. So I think they really need to start looking into how can we make this team not even great offensively, just competent.
Yeah.
What do we do? Although trading away Aaron Gordon and Fournier would, in theory, be a hit against that, sometimes you just got to do that and try to get some young, promising players. And Vucevic, too. I mean, he's a trade candidate. That $25 million contract, that's looking mighty tradable right about now.
All right, dude, I'm done talking about this team.
Are you disgusted?
I feel filthy. I need to clean myself.
All right, no offense to Magic players, but, I think you guys are probably on the same boat after watching this season. I mean, some of those games.
All right, let's break.
All right, sounds good.
And we're back to talk about the team who we all think is the 8th seed, but currently sits at the 7th seed,
Yes.
The Brooklyn Nets.
So exciting. I can't wait to talk about the Brooklyn Nets and the shambling corpse of a team that they're bringing to Orlando, to the bubble. I mean, if you follow basketball news at all, you already know this, but we'll get into it a little later. This is unprecedented, I think, in terms of how empty of a team they're bringing. So, I mean, let's just get into it and, hope it's not too painful.
So the draft. It's the first draft pick that they've owned outright in, I think, 5 years.
Trying to build a super team is a bitch, ain't it?
Yep, and they traded it.
But they got Taurean Prince.
They did. I mean, I'm not saying it was a bad trade. I just thought it was funny that after waiting so long to have their draft pick, because people forget, even before the 4 straight years of Boston picks, there was the Atlanta pick swap, which was a remnant of the Joe Johnson trade. But yeah, so they trade this year's pick and a 2020 first-round pick and Alan Crabb to the Hawks for Taurean Prince. Basically, like, 1 first-rounder for Taurean Prince and another first-rounder to take on the $20 million salary of Alan Crabb.
Astounding how these contracts exist.
Well, what's funny about Alan Crabb is the Nets, so they signed him to a massive offer during his restricted free agency, and then Portland matches it, and then Portland trades him to the Nets later, after that contract becomes clearly terrible. And now the Nets had to attach a first-rounder to get off of it.
But the important thing is they got the cap space they needed for 2 big deals, and through that they were able to get KD and Kyrie, which we'll get into a little bit more when we talk about free agency. And then they had a late first-rounder that they drafted. Pardon me if I mispronounce this.
You got this, man.
Mfiondu Kabengele traded to the Clippers for the 56th pick, which was Jalen Hands, and they got a 2020 first-round pick back for it.
Jalen Hands does not sound like he's a person that exists.
Mr. Hands? I would not recommend looking that up.
Their draft, I mean, yeah, they got Jalen Hands, that's about it. On to free agency, let's talk about the big ones. Signs Kyrie, 4 years, $136.5 million. On top of that, they do a sign and trade D'Angelo Russell for KD. KD signs a 4-year, $164.3 million deal. And they get a 2020 first-round pick from the Warriors.
But it's top 20 protected.
Yeah, which
they were definitely not expecting to actually matter. But now, looking in the rear view, that is a pretty genius protection from the Warriors.
And to round out the buddy trio, the inseparable 3 amigos, they also signed DeAndre Jordan, $40 million over 4 years.
I'm sure that KD and Kyrie were just so happy about that too. And then just to finish up free agency, they also signed Nicholas Claxton to a 3-year minimum, Wilson Chandler to a 1-year minimum, Garrett Temple for 2 years, $10 million, but the second year is a team option, Theo Pinson, 2 years, $3 million, second-year team option, and David Nwaba, 2 years, $3.5 million. Nothing particularly exciting there, just kind of ticking the boxes, trying to make sure that they have a full roster that has some core competencies, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're all bargain signings, nothing to really bat an eye at.
I'm surprised that Garrett Temple got $5 million a year, but other than that, there's nothing really to talk about. But I think the major story of this offseason is that this is a pretty big gambit, because you go from a Nets team they were energized last year. No one expected anything from them, and they leapfrogged all the way to the 6th seed with D'Angelo Russell, who I think people had hopes, but no one had expectations, really, for him to take as big of a jump as he did. So you take this unconventional young team that just kind of miraculously makes it into the playoffs and like a pretty respectable seed, and then you transform it into what on paper is a championship contender. The only issues is that championship contender is anchored by Kyrie Irving, who, I mean, let's just say it is batshit insane, and Kevin Durant, who just suffered the worst injury in basketball. So, I mean, we'll see what happens next year. Obviously, already this year you have Kyrie obviously, this is all rumor, gossip, palace intrigue about Kyrie complaining about his teammates that have been on the team longer than him and how they don't have the right pieces yet, and all these, like, really underhanded comments that are basically indicating that the young players that Brooklyn had before they're not what we need, right? This is why we needed DeAndre Jordan to replace Jared Allen, even though Jared Allen is, like, better.
I get what you're saying. It's like, in some ways you have to look at the 2019-20 season as the segue season between two team identities. You have the previous 18-19 fun, young, benches all really happy Brooklyn Nets. And then you have the Nets to be, the 2020-2021, knock on wood, I hope this team actually plays Nets with KD and Kyrie, right?
Yeah.
And I think this segues into what our expectations of the season were, which would be for me, what are we going to see with these role players in this intermediary season? Are they going to be productive? Are they going to be the sort of guys that we want to have around Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving?
Yeah, it's about cementing kind of an identity among this group of unclear fits as you prepare for these two big personality stars to come and play together. In terms of how well this team would actually play this year, a few of the predictions were a bit optimistic. You had SB Nation having them as the 5th seed, ESPN having them as the 5th seed, with 47 wins and 35 losses per SB Nation, 45 wins, 37 losses ESPN. Vegas had them as the 6th seed with about 44 wins. 538 was probably the most realistic about where they would land, and had them at 39 wins, 43 losses at the 8th seed, which is probably going to be right about where they land. There were reasons to be worried about their fit together compared to some of the other teams that were, I think, undervalued before the season actually started. But yeah, I mean, as you said, this is a transition year. It doesn't really matter how well they do. It's just like, you got to have Caris LeVert front and center, right? As well as Kyrie, etc.
Matters for Caris.
Yep, that's for sure.
His future is very, very tied to how they do this season, you know?
Yeah, so how did they do this season? Well, you know, I would say similarly to the Magic, mediocre, but they had a couple more dramatic shifts throughout the season rather than just being like, oh, we're going to win a few, lose a few, win a few, lose a few. They went on a 12-6 run from mid-November to late December. It was an easy schedule, but they beat the Celtics, the Nuggets, and the Sixers. And then they lost 12 games out of the next 14 after that. And then they also ended the season on a 12-9 run and wins against the Pacers, the Raptors, the Celtics, and the Lakers, which, again, pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, like, the big difference between the Magic and the Nets to me is the Magic didn't beat anybody good. The Nets actually beat some good teams.
Oh, yeah, convincingly, too.
And they played really good games.
It stands to mention that they were better without Kyrie than they were with, and I think we'll try to figure out what's going on there. They went 8-12 with Kyrie on the court, 22-22 without him. And so, like, you know, this built up a few narratives, right? So you have Kyrie. On the court, he looks absolutely brilliant. He's scoring 27.5 points per game, getting 5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, on 48% from the field, 39% from 3. He's shooting over 90% on free throw attempts. His box plus minus is a 7.6, which is...
It's very high.
Historically, like, MVPs have been won with lower BPMs than that.
Yeah.
And over 0.216 win shares per 48, which is also very impressive. But his plus minus numbers weren't really that good. He kind of hovered around the 0 mark, which indicates that was the team really better or worse without him on or off? It comes down to a rounding error.
Yeah, I mean, he had a great season. It just didn't translate to winning. The issue with playing with Kyrie is you almost get into the anti-Zion effect of when you're playing next to Zion Williamson, he makes everyone better because he doesn't need the ball in his hands a whole lot, right? Like, he's going to give you assists because you pass to him and he dunks it, right?
Right.
Kyrie's the opposite. He takes the ball out of your hands, doesn't pass to you, and basically belittles your role, right?
Yeah.
You're just not going to be as engaged if you're playing next to someone like that.
This is the straight truth. I mean, I'm sorry, but Kyrie has consistently shown that even while making himself look incredible, because he's very talented as an individual, there's an issue with his playing of the team sport. And then on the opposite side, you have Spencer Dinwiddie, who some were saying was a borderline all-star, and he's the opposite of Kyrie, you know? His counting stats are significantly worse. You're getting 20.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and about 7 assists. But the efficiency numbers, I mean, they're worse than Aaron Gordon's. 41.5% from the field, 30.8 from 3, and less than 80% at the line. BPM was 1.7, which isn't bad, but not great. 0.123 win shares per 48. Again, not bad, but not great. But this plus-minus numbers kind of tell the whole story. His on-off plus-minus was plus 4.2, significantly better than Kyrie. And I think the wins with him as the starting point guard versus Kyrie also put that into perspective.
Spencer Dinwiddie is an interesting case because on the one hand, his percentages are really low. You'd like to have your point guard shooting closer to 45% from the field and 35% from three.
Ideally. That's like a John Wall number, you know?
Yeah.
It's like you're still not super efficient, but you're passable.
Yeah. Like that's the point at which you shouldn't be that worried.
It is impressive, though, that the team was so good with such an inefficient point guard, and I think it shows selflessness.
Well, if you watch the tape, the shots that he's shooting, especially the three-pointers, are very difficult. He was often switched onto big men and then doing step-back threes in a big man's face, right?
Yeah,
like,
and I think he was
it's a hard shot to hit.
He's one of the few players that actually had, like, the green light to just, like, all right, you take it, take the shot, be the killer. You might be inefficient on it, but at least they know that you're not going to fuck around with it.
Yeah, he also plays really hard.
Oh, yeah.
He runs all the time. He's constantly driving to the basket, pushing the ball in transition. I think that's the sort of stuff that gets his teammates pumped to play with him, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's motivational to a certain degree.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Spencer Dinwiddie. But aside from this Dinwiddie-Irving kind of dichotomy, the season was a little bit boring, I would say. Maybe, I don't know if boring is the word, but definitely not as exciting as you would hope for. Like Caris LeVert, who people were very psyched about.
I was very excited about this.
We were so excited about him.
This stretch at the end of the season was insane.
Yeah, but he had this injury early on in the season that took him out for a good amount of games, and we just like didn't see much of him until near the end. And then, as we saw, he was quite good, even though he actually, along with Aaron Gordon, was one of the least efficient starters per true shooting, which I thought was really interesting. You'd expect him to be better considering his efficiency from three. In terms of actual function on the court, I think he did quite a bit better than Aaron Gordon in that he was someone that the team could rely on to shoot really good three-pointers or be a capable secondary ball handler, do these things that you're expecting him to be good at, and putting up pretty solid numbers at the same time.
I think part of the issue is his percentages, which were, he shot 41% from the field and 38% from three on the year. I think they were dragged down significantly by his play at the beginning of the year. And I think there's two reasons for that. A, he's coming off of his injury, and B, he's coming off the bench in the beginning. I just don't think the bench role worked for him. Some guys don't play as well coming off the bench. But when you get into the end of the season, when he goes on his stretch, so in the last 5 games, Brooklyn goes 4-1 with wins over the Lakers, Celtics, and the Spurs. LeVert scored 27.4 points per game on 49.5% shooting from the field, 44% shooting from three, 6.4 boards, and 6 assists. That's an insane stretch. And he scores 51 points against the Celtics, which is a career high, by far.
And he also scored a triple-double against the Spurs. He really came into his own when Kyrie was out and he was starting. And I think that's really promising. But it's also kind of concerning when you think of how is he going to fit with Kyrie and KD next year. Because I imagine if you tear apart the team, he's going to be one of the few pieces that you're not going to part ways with.
Well, he's not a good spot-up shooter, which if you're building a team around Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, despite the fact that Kyrie Irving did not mention Joe Harris when he said his list of players that are good on the Nets.
Which is
you want
insulting.
Players like Joe Harris on the Nets.
Joe Harris might be one of their most important players going into next year.
As a complimentary piece for those other two guys, for sure.
He's a guy that a team like the Magic could really use.
Just to sort of hammer that point in about Caris LeVert, he had such a good season, especially at the end of the year. You've got to ask yourself going forward, should we cash in on his higher value right now to get a player that fits better with our 2 stars? Or do we keep this guy that might be a third star on the team. You might even be able to call that a big three with how good Caris LeVert was playing. That's a really tough organizational decision.
So moving on to just more peripheral players, really the story of the year was just a lot of really disappointing, mediocre performances from their role players.
Yeah.
Taurean Prince had probably his worst year, just shooting abysmally. The one shining light, unfortunately, as well, so it comes with good and bad, was David Nwaba, who was shooting over 50% from the field and 43% on three. He was in the 98th percentile per cleaning the glass in team efficiency differential. So while he was on the court, the team scored 13 more points than they allowed per 100. And defense-wise, and I think this is why Houston signed him after he was waived by the Nets after his Achilles injury, which is funny how the Nets will treat one player with an Achilles injury one way, and then they'll leave another one in the dust. He was in the 99th percentile in opponent effective field goal percentage. When he guarded someone, their effective field goal percentage dropped by over 8%, which is, this might be an effective small sample size, but clearly there's a reason that Houston sees promise in him. And I think a lot of people saw him as one of the more reliable go-to guys when you needed to guard the other team's spot-up shooters and things like that. I mean, he's kind of perfect for Houston, right? Because he knows his role. He's good at shooting threes. That's all you need from him. On the Nets...
And defense, obviously.
And defense, right, exactly. So I think he would have been great to keep on the Nets. Really unfortunate Achilles injury. I mean, we had more of those than you can count this year. It was really a crazy year in terms of that.
Kind of an oddly short-sighted move by the Nets to waive him, eh?
Yeah, especially now. Well, I guess it really doesn't matter for them coming into the bubble. But yeah, you'd wonder why wouldn't they at least see if he can recover into some of what he are.
They could just staple his Achilles together and throw him out there.
That's what the Warriors did to KD before Game 5 of the finals last year, right?
All right, you're good to go, man.
That too soon? I'm not sure. In terms of their lineups, their most used lineup at almost 500 minutes was Spencer Dinwiddie, Garrett Temple, Joe Harris, Taurean Prince, and Jared Allen. Their net rating was a nice golden goose egg, 0, big fat 0. They put up 7 more three-point attempts per 100 possessions than their opponents and over 4 more assists, but the rebounding was pretty bad. I mean, I think you can see why when Jared Allen is
He's not a good rebounder.
No, and he's probably the best rebounder out of that lineup by a country mile.
Yeah, it's interesting, looking at him next to DeAndre Jordan, because in some ways you think of them as being really similar. They're both rim-running bigs, but there are certain little details where one is way better than the other, right?
Yeah. Interesting enough, though, keep looking at more of their lineups. You switch out Garrett Temple for Caris LeVert, and this lineup, which played 208 minutes, had over plus 11 net rating. Their assist-to-turnover ratio was 2.44, which is, I would say, unimpeachable for a lineup of
very nice
players of that caliber, right? The rebounding was actually good, and they put up over 14 more three-point attempts than their opponents and on higher accuracy compared to team average. You can see why. You have Joe Harris and Caris LeVert are both very capable, and Taurean Prince, at least in theory, is a very capable corner shooter. But, I mean, that's a really good lineup.
Yeah, I mean, you're surrounding a good slasher, Spencer Dinwiddie, and a good roll man with capable shooters. Usually those lineups are really good, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, the good thing for the Nets is that this is a lineup of players that I think they see staying in their future, at least in the near term. So this is a good one that they can kind of fall back on if they decide to play some of these players off the bench instead of starting, if they deem that the fit with Kyrie or KD isn't perfect, and the players are able to come in and accept that. It's a good one. I thought another interesting one, which was kind of the opposite, it had Caris LeVert as the main playmaker with Garrett Temple, Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot, Wilson Chandler, and DeAndre Jordan. Sounds like a terrible lineup. Plus 11 over 120 minutes. The assist-to-turnover ratio was horrible, but the rebounding numbers were insane. I think you can attribute all of that to DeAndre Jordan just being a monster on the boards, and it's a pretty big lineup as well. So I think this is a lineup that you'd see going up against a team like Philadelphia or something.
Yeah, it's got a pretty respectable amount of minutes, too. 120 minutes, I respect that.
And then just one last lineup, because we know you guys love these numbers. I like to call this one the hell lineup, because you look at it and you're like, wait, this is like what they think is going to be great. But in reality, this is terrible. So you have Kyrie Irving, Joe Harris, Caris LeVert, Taurean Prince, and DeAndre Jordan. Overall, these are like 4 guys that they could call on to start any night, especially now with DeAndre Jordan getting preferential treatment, if we want to get into that Palace intrigue as we talked about. But over 45 minutes, this was minus 20.5 net rating. And somehow, with Kyrie Irving and Joe Harris and Caris LeVert and Taurean Prince and DeAndre Jordan, they had almost 9 fewer assists per 100 possessions than their opponents. And I think this goes back to what you were talking about with the Kyrie effect. He's not passing. He's got Joe Harris, who's a super capable shooter. He's got Caris LeVert, who can handle his own. He's got DeAndre Jordan, who can just hang out near the rim and just throw it in the fucking basket. And yet, this is why his plus-minus numbers are so bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only that he's not passing, it's also that when he gets passed to, he's not giving an assist. Because he takes the ball and dribbles like 50 times and takes a shot.
That's true. So, I mean, that lineup actually does make you wonder, like, how is this team really going to work? Like, when you slot in KD for Taurean Prince...
It's going to be awesome, dude.
I mean...
I didn't know. Like, that's all I was thinking about when I looked at this lineup, is how amazing it's going to be with KD instead of Taurean Prince.
I mean, this is very much like, you switch in KD for Taurean Prince, and this is very possibly their main starting lineup for next year. So as we move on from the, let's say, the trees of the lineup data to the forest of the organization as a whole, probably everyone remembers that Kenny Atkinson, who fearlessly led this team from just the dregs to respectable spot as of last year, was, well, they mutually decided with the Nets organization to part ways. And we had Jacques Vaughn as the interim coach for 2 games. Probably the biggest thing out of that was that he started DeAndre Jordan instead of Jared Allen.
Not just the biggest, it's the only thing. Other than maybe an awesome Caris LeVert game.
You have so much Palace intrigue with this team that really almost outweighs what's actually happening on the court. Like, is this Kyrie and KD scheming with the management? And is this idea that Kenny Atkinson can't take us to the next level, so let's get us a coach who can? Which the Windhorst rumor recently was that they want Mark Jackson, who is, like, hilariously the development coach that took the Warriors to the point at which they needed to fire him and get an actual championship coach. So maybe they're going to fire Mark Jackson in a few years and get Steve Kerr. Who knows?
Life comes full circle, Dimitri.
That's true.
I thought it was a little sad that Kenny Atkinson didn't get a chance to coach the full team. He's been with the organization for, 3-4 years? He took them from the doldrums to where they are now.
Yeah, I think it was a really surprising decision. I'm very surprised that he didn't get to coach at least a few games with KD and Kyrie, but I think...
Also weird because they were on a tear.
Yeah.
When they fired him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might just come down to they just wanted to pull the Band-Aid off. They knew that they were going to do it anyways, and at least this gives him chances to interview with teams that are desperate for a new head coach, such as the Bulls, the Knicks, maybe the Hawks, who knows?
I've also heard rumors they like Vaughn. So that's a possibility too. Let's just get into quickly questions that we had about the season and going forward, maybe bubble stuff too.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things is what's going to happen with Spencer Dinwiddie, right? So he comes off the bench to start the season with Kyrie Irving starting games. So then Dinwiddie starts when Kyrie goes out, and the Nets play very well. So then when Kyrie comes back again, for the first 6 games, they start them together, and they go 1-5. Which I think changing the lineups was a little bit premature. If you look at the lineup data, they were plus 3.4 with the starting lineup that they were using, which was Irving, Dinwiddie, Harris, Prince, and Allen. And I just think going forward, it's an interesting lineup to look at because you wonder what they're going to do with Dinwiddie when KD comes back, right? Like,
yeah.
Is he going to be the starting shooting guard next to Kyrie? Or are they going to start Joe Harris or Caris LeVert? Like, right. All 3 of those guys are really good, so you have to figure out which 2 of those 3 are going to start.
Yeah, it's quite a big question for them because they have a clear top 4. KD, Kyrie, Caris, and Spencer. Mm-hmm. Will those 4 work together? I would say not as well as if you had one of those switched out for Joe Harris.
Yeah.
It provides a lot more
He's the glue.
outside shooting. Exactly. Basically, either Caris LeVert or Spencer Dinwiddie will need to bite the bullet and be the head of the bench mob next year. I think more likely than not, it's going to be Spencer Dinwiddie. I don't know. With this team, they do all sorts of shit that we don't expect.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be Spencer Dinwiddie just by virtue of the fact that his numbers don't change drastically when he comes off the bench. Whereas Caris LeVert's do. He's just way worse off the bench.
Yeah.
It's probably just more years of experience being a bench player for Spencer Dinwiddie.
Yeah. And you know what? Either you can try to fight for that last little all-star spot if you're Dinwiddie, or you can fight for Sixth Man of the Year. And I think he could be a great Sixth Man of the Year.
Yeah. And then the last man in the lineup that we didn't talk about is who's going to be the center, which is the other question I have. Apparently the big point of contention between the Stars and Atkinson, like you said, was DeAndre Jordan starting, right? DeAndre Jordan starts immediately after Jacques Vaughn takes over.
Yeah, which is just, I mean, really, you have Jared Allen, who's still fairly raw, but this guy needs minutes. Like, if he needs anything, it's more minutes to develop. And in this season that doesn't really matter, I really don't see why you're appeasing DeAndre Jordan's ego at the expense of this needed experience.
Yeah, I think, there's a narrative that DeAndre Jordan is so much worse than Jared Allen. If you look at the lineup stats, lineups with Allen at center are plus 1.6. Lineups with Jordan are minus 2.3. It's not that big of a difference.
Both hovering around the 0 mark.
Right. And look, they're just good at different things, right? Like the lineups with Jared Allen are much better on offense, and the lineups with DeAndre Jordan are much better at rebounding and on defense. So there is a give and take there. My room temperature take?
Yeah.
My room temperature take is, why not just have them both and play them both 24 minutes a game so you have a really solid center out there all game?
I agree with that. Yeah, I think my main sticking point for that issue isn't so much that one is going to be miles better than the other. It's just that DeAndre Jordan is 32 as of today. Happy birthday, DeAndre Jordan. And Jared Allen is very young still. He is 22. Just turned 22 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Happy belated birthday, Jared Allen. So in a throwaway season, basically, which of these guys are you going to put out there? Because I don't think it should be the guy who's 32 years old and can just come out for minor minutes when needed. I think it should be the guy that may well be your franchise's future center if this experiment doesn't work out. But who knows?
Are you MILF hating right now?
Listen, I love MILFs. I'm just trying to be realistic as to what the Nets should be doing because, by the way, if you guys are hiring, I'm available for an interview at any time. I'm unemployed, so you have my number. Yeah, you have my number, Sean. But the big question, even bigger than that, is what the fuck is this team going to look like as they show up in Orlando, or more accurately, don't show up in Orlando, because DeAndre Jordan's out, Taurean Prince is out, Spencer Dinwiddie is out, all due to COVID. Wilson Chandler opted out. Kyrie, KD, and Nicholas Claxton are injured. Nicholas Claxton, by the way, the most important of the three, obviously. And I think they're going to have the biggest group of replacement players, and it just looks like a really strange patchwork of Tyler Johnson, Jamal Crawford, Lance Thomas, Dante Hall, and Justin Anderson replacing Michael Beasley, who we were all very, very excited to see, but unfortunately also got COVID.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sad, it really shows you the sort of disadvantages that coming from a market that got hit by the virus very hard has. It's really sad. But,
yeah.
What would be sick, though, is if Michael Beasley recovered and then signed with the Lakers, and the Lakers had Michael Beasley, J.R. Smith, Deion Waiters, and JaVale McGee on the same team.
I think the term meme team was invented precisely.
Oh, and Dwight Howard.
Oh, and Dwight, yeah, of course.
How can you forget him?
That would be great. I think they would do so well. But yeah, I mean, just to be brief about this, because really, I mean, this kind of underscores how pointless the 30-minute discussion we just had was. What the fuck is this team going to look like? I saw someone who did a calculation of PER is a terrible stat, I think, but this kind of goes to show how bad this team is going to be. The combined PERs of the Wizards without Bradley Beal and Davis Bertans is higher than that of the Nets team that we're going to see.
Wow.
538 gives them a 5% or 1 in 20 chance of losing their playoff spot to the Wizards. I would be kind of excited to see a play-in tournament between the two teams. That's just going to be some quality G League basketball airing on the national airwaves. I don't know, maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment, but that sounds kind of fun.
Yeah, dude. I'm sure you're super psyched for the Magic Nets game on opening night, right?
For sure. I just hope Jamal Crawford hits some fucking sick threes, gets some 4-point fouls, you know?
They should bring Michael Beasley on as an analyst.
Yeah, a player coach or something like that.
No, just have him on the TNT broadcast talking about the future.
Just mumbling to himself while the other two broadcasters are trying to ignore him.
Just hanging out, using 11% of his brain.
Yeah, I mean, I think based on... So what's interesting is that Orlando and Brooklyn face each other twice over 8 games. I think that benefits Orlando heavily.
Yeah.
I think that's going to pretty much lock them in as the 7th seed. And then, I don't know, do you think that the Wizards have a chance to leapfrog them?
No.
No? I don't know. I'm going to be an optimist for the Wizards because...
It would be fun to have a play-in tournament, though.
Yeah, I think it's possible.
I just think with Caris LeVert, you've got the best player between those two teams.
That's true.
And I think he's going to carry the Nets to more wins than Ishak Bonga.
No, it's true. Yeah, I'm struggling to think of another player. I guess Thomas Bryant.
Who's going to be their leading scorer, dude? Like, Rui, I guess?
Yeah.
He probably is, yeah.
Yeah, Superman Rui. Well, I mean, that's pretty much all she wrote. I don't really have...
Let's just plug a couple things. We might be doing we are going to be doing our first guest appearance. Woo! On Thursday. We'll keep the identity of this guest secret for now.
It's not Kyrie Irving or anything.
Let's just say he's unemployed and might be Kenny Atkinson. No, I'm just kidding. We're really excited about that, though. What else are we doing?
Oh, I think we might be doing a watch-along stream when the season re-debuts.
Yeah.
So we'll be watching and commentating, so you can basically have the game on your TV and then have us on and then mute, Marv Albert and listen to us instead. I mean, I think that sounds like a good time.
Might be some drinking involved there.
A little bit. And then I'm working on a large top-secret project just to pique y'all's interest, so keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and as always, give us a like, a sub, a review, depending on if you're watching this on YouTube or on a podcast streaming app.
Perhaps a retweet if you are following along at Twitter, or what do they do on Instagram? Probably shouldn't reveal how bad we are at this shit.
Shoot us some dick pics on Instagram.
Yep.
Give us a follow at Away Team Pod on Twitter.
Yeah. And our DMs are always open if you want to just anonymously harass us as well. So.
Yeah, fuck yeah. Away Team out.
Peace.